You got out of bed this morning and your legs felt heavier than they did 5 years ago. You didn't fall, you didn't trip, but something felt different, and you've been noticing it for months. The stairs that used to be nothing, the chair you now push off of with your arms instead of standing straight up out of it. I'm Dr. Ryan Walker. I'm a physician specializing in geriatric medicine, and for 17 years I have watched this exact picture play out in my exam room, almost always with the same opening line. I don't know what's wrong, I just feel weaker. Most people your age have been told to just eat more protein. That advice, while not wrong, leaves out the one factor that changes everything after 60, the fact that your muscles stop listening to protein the way they used to, no matter how much of it you eat. The gap between incomplete advice and complete advice is the difference between a body that rebuilds itself every day and one that quietly loses ground every year without you ever eating wrong. There is no revenue in a 12-minute appointment to explain the biology of anabolic resistance, so I am going to do it here for free, right now. The supplement industry has no interest in telling you that a $4 carton of eggs or a $3 can of sardines can outperform a protein shake that costs 10 times as much, because there's no shake to sell you once you understand what your muscles actually need. And the food at the very top of this list isn't a supplement at all, and it isn't the protein source most people assume it is. Researchers at the University of Texas Medical Branch spent years mapping exactly how much of it your body needs in a single sitting to flip the switch on muscle repair. And getting that one number right changed outcomes more than almost anything else they studied. Before we dive in, drop your age in the comments and tell me, do you feel stronger or weaker than you did 2 years ago? I read every comment, and your answer shapes what I cover next. I've ranked what follows by how directly each food targets the root biological cause of leg weakness in aging bodies, not by how popular it is, and not by how it's marketed. Some of these will surprise you. Let's start at number 5. Number 5 is potassium and magnesium-rich foods. Think bananas, potatoes with the skin on, and dark leafy greens like spinach and Swiss chard. Don't let this position fool you. This one is sitting in almost every senior kitchen in America right now, and almost nobody is eating enough of it to matter. Most seniors have been told that a banana before bed will stop night cramps in their legs. That belief is costing them accuracy, because the research on this is more complicated than the folklore. And I want to be straight with you about it instead of overselling it. Here's what we actually know. Potassium is the mineral responsible for the electrical charge across every muscle cell in your legs. It's what allows the signal from your brain to reach the muscle and tell it to contract, and then to relax again. When potassium drops even modestly below the normal range, that electrical signaling gets sloppy, and the result can be cramping, twitching, and a feeling of general weakness that has nothing to do with how much muscle tissue you actually have. On magnesium specifically, I want to be honest with you. A major Cochrane review of nighttime leg cramps found that magnesium supplements performed no better than a placebo for most older adults with ordinary cramps. That's not the answer the supplement aisle wants you to hear, but it's the honest one. Where magnesium and potassium clearly do matter is in the baseline chemistry that lets your leg muscles fire correctly hundreds of times a day, every time you walk, climb a step, or rise from a chair. Think of potassium like the electricity running through the wiring of an old house. The wiring your muscle fibers can be perfectly intact, but if the electrical current running through it is too weak or inconsistent, the lights flicker even though nothing is structurally broken. That's what a mild chronic potassium shortfall feels like in your legs. Not damage, just a signal that keeps cutting out. This matters more after 60 because reduced kidney efficiency, certain blood pressure medications, and lower overall food intake all conspire to quietly push potassium toward the low end of normal 8 pattern some geriatricians call subclinical depletion, meaning your labs might look fine while your muscles are still getting an underpowered signal. I think of a pattern I've seen in dozens of patients over the years, which I'll illustrate through one composite case I'll call Dorothy, 74, from a small town in Ohio. Dorothy had gardened every single morning for 2 decades. It was as much a part of her identity as her name. When her legs started cramping by mid-afternoon and feeling unsteady on the porch steps, her previous doctor attributed it to just getting older. What actually changed things was simple. We added a baked potato with the skin, a serving of spinach, and one banana into her daily routine, spread across meals rather than dumped into one. 6 weeks later, her afternoon cramping had dropped from nearly daily to once a week, and she told me the porch steps stopped feeling like a decision. Here's how to actually do this tonight. A medium baked potato with the skin left on has close to 900 milligrams of potassium. The skin holds a surprising amount of it, so don't peel it away. Wash it, prick it a few times with a fork, and bake it until a knife slides in with almost no resistance, about 45 minutes at 400 degrees. The skin gets slightly crisp and salty if you rub a little olive oil on it first. The inside stays soft and almost fluffy. Pair that with a handful of raw spinach wilted into your eggs or soup. It cooks down to almost nothing in under 2 minutes, releasing a mild, slightly mineral flavor that disappears into whatever you're cooking. The synergy tip here: pair potassium-rich foods with adequate protein at the same meal, because potassium supports the electrical signal that tells the muscle to contract, while protein supplies what the muscle actually contracts with. One without the other is like having power but no wiring, or wiring but no power. The next food on this list works on a completely different system, not electricity, but plumbing. It's about how much blood and oxygen your leg muscles can actually receive when you ask them to work. And the vegetable responsible for it turns your urine faintly pink the next morning, which alarms almost every first-time user until I warn them about it in advance. Number 4 is beets and dark leafy greens, eaten specifically for their nitrate content, and this is where the story gets genuinely interesting, because it has nothing to do with protein at all. Most seniors have been told that leg weakness is purely a muscle mass problem. Build the muscle, fix the weakness. That belief is costing them an entire mechanism, because you can have plenty of muscle tissue and still feel weak if that tissue isn't getting enough blood flow to perform. Researchers at Indiana University, led by exercise physiologist Andrew Coggin, gave older adults a single dose of nitrate-rich beetroot juice and measured leg muscle speed and power before and after. The nitrate-supplemented group showed measurable increases in both maximal muscle speed and power compared to placebo from a single dose, in muscles that had done nothing differently except receive more dietary nitrate. That's not a typo. A follow-up study from the same research group found the effect held up with short-term daily use over 2 weeks without tolerance developing, which is the opposite of what happens with many nitrate-based heart medications. Here's the mechanism, and I want you to picture your garden hose. Nitrate from beets and leafy greens gets converted in your body first by bacteria on your tongue, then in your stomach into nitric oxide, a molecule that relaxes and widens the blood vessels feeding your leg muscles. Picture a garden hose that's been sitting kinked for years. The water pressure at the source hasn't changed, but almost nothing is getting through to the nozzle. Nitric oxide unkinks that hose. More blood, more oxygen, and more nutrients reach the working muscle in real time, which is a completely separate lever from how much muscle tissue you're carrying. Why this matters specifically after 60: aging blood vessels lose some of their natural ability to produce nitric oxide on their own, a process tied to what researchers call endothelial dysfunction. Essentially, the inner lining of your blood vessels becomes less responsive over time. That decline in vascular flexibility is part of why two people with identical muscle mass on a scan can perform very differently on a set of stairs. One has an open hose, the other has a kink in it. I think of another composite case, a gentleman I'll call Frank, 79, from a coastal town in Oregon, who had walked to the pier and back every morning for 15 years as his version of church. When that walk started leaving him winded and slow through the legs, specifically not his lungs, his legs, his previous doctor chalked it up to normal decline. We didn't change his exercise at all. We added roasted beets and a daily serving of arugula to his lunch. Within about 3 weeks, he reported the second half of his walk. The uphill return leg no longer felt like a separate, harder walk. To prepare this tonight, take 2 or 3 medium beets, scrub them, wrap each one in foil, and roast at 400 degrees for about an hour until a knife slides through with almost no resistance. Let them cool slightly, then rub the skins off under running water. They'll slip away easily, leaving a deep magenta flesh that's earthy, faintly sweet. and slightly reminds people of the smell of fresh soil. In a good way, not a bad one. Slice them over a bed of arugula or spinach with a little olive oil and lemon. The greens alone contribute nitrate too, so the combination compounds the effect rather than just adding two separate foods side by side. One honest caveat before we move on: this effect is well documented for exercise performance and vascular function, but you should know that beets will very likely turn your urine, and sometimes your stool, a pink or reddish color the next day. It's harmless, it's called beeturia, but I've had more than one worried phone call about it, so consider yourself warned in advance. If nobody sat you down and explained why your legs specifically feel weaker than the rest of your body, and what to actually do about it beyond walk more, tap subscribe, because that is exactly what this channel exists to do, every week, for free. Hit the like button if you learned something in the last few minutes that your last doctor's appointment never covered. And if you know someone who started avoiding stairs or hills because their legs feel unreliable, share this with them today. Number 3 is fatty fish salmon, sardines, and mackerel. And this is where two mechanisms we've already discussed start to work together. Most seniors have been told fish is good for your heart and left it at that. That belief is costing them the muscle-specific benefit almost nobody mentions, because the omega-3 fats in fatty fish don't just protect your arteries, they change how responsive your muscle cells are to the protein you eat. In a landmark study from Washington University, researchers gave healthy older adults between 60 and 85 either fish oil or a corn oil placebo for 6 months, with no change to their exercise habits. The fish oil group saw their thigh muscle volume increase by an average of 3.6% compared to the control group from a capsule with no additional exercise. The lead investigators noted this was one of the first studies to show a nutritional intervention alone could meaningfully build muscle tissue in sedentary older adults. That's not a rounding error. That's real tissue growth from a change in fat intake alone. Here's the mechanism. And picture your muscle cells like a hotel checking in guests. Amino acids from your food are the guests, but as we age, the front desk, the cellular machinery that recognizes those amino acids and puts them to work, gets slower and less responsive, even when there's no shortage of guests arriving. This is the essence of anabolic resistance. Plenty of protein showing up at the door, but a front desk that stopped efficiently checking it in. Omega-3 fatty acids appear to speed that front desk back up, making your muscle cells more sensitive to the protein and insulin signals that trigger repair and growth, largely by calming the low-grade background inflammation that builds up in aging tissue and interferes with those signals in the first place. This connects directly back to what we just covered with beets. Nitrates improve how much blood and oxygen reaches the muscle. Omega-3s improve how effectively that muscle responds once nutrients arrive. Pair a beet salad with a piece of grilled salmon, and you're addressing delivery and reception in the same meal. I think of a composite patient I'll call Helen, 71, from a suburb outside Chicago, who had been the one who always insisted on carrying her own groceries up from the car, a small point of pride. When that started to feel genuinely difficult, her previous doctor suggested it was simply deconditioning and told her to walk more. We added fatty fish to her plate 3 times a week, and nothing else changed in her exercise routine for the first 2 months. At her next visit, she mentioned, almost as an aside, that she'd carried in a full bag of groceries without setting it down halfway up the driveway, which she said she hadn't done in over a year. To prepare this tonight or tomorrow, a fillet of salmon, patted dry, seasoned simply with salt and pepper, seared skin side down in a hot pan with a little olive oil for about 4 minutes until the skin turns deep golden and crackling, then flipped for 2 more minutes until the flesh is opaque and flakes apart easily with a fork. The smell alone, that faint, clean ocean smell mixed with browning butter, is part of what makes people actually stick with this one. If cooking fresh fish feels like too much some nights, canned sardines packed in olive oil, eaten straight from the tin on whole grain crackers, deliver a very similar dose of omega-3s in under a minute of effort, with a rich, slightly briny flavor that surprises people who assumed they'd hate it. Aim for fatty fish 2 to 3 times per week if you can manage it. The dose used in the research that produced that 3.6% thigh muscle increase was roughly equivalent to a serving of salmon most days. so more frequent moderate portions beat one large fish dinner on Sundays. So far, you've learned that beets and leafy greens can measurably increase leg muscle speed and power from a single dose, and that fatty fish can grow thigh muscle volume over 6 months without any additional exercise, two things most doctors simply don't have time to explain in a standard appointment. You could stop this video right now and start shopping with just those two in mind, and you'd be ahead of where you were 10 minutes ago. But item 2 involves a vitamin most people think is only about their bones, and new research is forcing geriatricians to reconsider how directly it acts on the muscle itself, not just the skeleton holding it up. Number 2 is eggs, specifically for the combination they offer that almost no other single food matches: complete high leucine protein alongside one of the few natural dietary sources of vitamin D. Most seniors have been told vitamin D is for your bones, full stop. That belief is costing them an understanding of a second pathway, because vitamin D receptors exist directly inside muscle tissue, and low vitamin D status is independently associated with reduced quadriceps strength, the muscle group most responsible for standing up from a chair and catching yourself if you start to trip. I want to be careful and honest with you here, because the vitamin D research is genuinely mixed, and I'd rather tell you the real picture than the simple one. A large network meta-analysis found that vitamin D at 800 to 1,000 international units daily, taken every day rather than in occasional large doses, was associated with a 22% reduction in fall risk in older adults, and that's a meaningful number for something with real biological plausibility behind it. But other reviews using different dosing schedules and larger, less frequent bolus doses found no benefit at all, and one large trial even found that infrequent high-dose vitamin D increased fall risk compared to steady daily lower doses. The pattern researchers keep landing on is this: steady and moderate beats, occasional and large, and dose and timing appear to matter more than simply getting more vitamin D. Here's the mechanism, using something in your own kitchen. Think of vitamin D like the dimmer switch on a lamp, not the light bulb itself. It doesn't build muscle tissue directly the way protein does, but it appears to regulate how efficiently the muscle fiber activates and contracts, turning the response up or down depending on how much is available. Several studies specifically looking at active forms of vitamin D found measurable improvement in quadriceps strength, even when overall global muscle strength measures didn't move much, which fits with vitamin D acting more like calibration than raw material. This is where eggs earn their spot at number 2. One large egg gives you both a meaningful amount of vitamin D and roughly a gram of leucine, the specific amino acid that acts as the ignition switch for muscle repair, which sets up perfectly for the final item on this list. I think of a composite patient I'll call Walter, 76, from a small town in North Carolina, who had played cards with the same 3 friends every Tuesday night for over a decade. Rising from his chair to refill drinks was such an automatic motion he'd never once thought about it. When rising from that chair started requiring a hand on the armrest, his previous doctor attributed it to arthritis, probably. We added 2 eggs most mornings, prepared simply, and nothing else changed for the first month. At his next visit, he told me, somewhat sheepishly, that he'd stood up at cards the previous week without using his hands at all, and one of his friends had actually commented on it. Preparing this tonight is about as simple as it gets, but the technique matters. 2 eggs cracked into a bowl, whisked until the yolk and white are fully blended into one pale yellow color with no streaks. Cook them low and slow in a buttered pan, stirring gently and constantly. Pulling them off the heat just before they look fully set, they'll finish cooking from residual heat, staying soft, glossy, and almost custard-like rather than dry and rubbery. That texture difference isn't just about taste. Slightly underdone eggs are also easier to eat consistently every morning, which matters more than any single perfect preparation. Number 1. The food that targets the actual root cause more directly than anything else on this list is high leucine, complete protein, specifically Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, and lean meat, eaten in the right amount at the right times, spread across your day. I told you at the start that this list is ranked by how directly each item addresses the root cause of leg weakness in aging bodies, and here is why this one sits at the very top. Everything else we've discussed, better blood flow from nitrates, better cellular responsiveness from omega-3s, better signal calibration from vitamin D, all of it is in service of one single event: the moment your muscle actually receives enough of the right amino acid to trigger repair. If that event doesn't happen, none of the supporting mechanisms have anything to work with. Researchers at the University of Texas Medical Branch, led by Dr. Douglas Padden-Jones, spent years mapping exactly how much protein it takes to cross what they termed the leucine threshold, the minimum dose of the amino acid leucine required in a single meal to meaningfully switch on muscle protein synthesis in an older adult. For younger adults, roughly 1 gram of leucine is often enough. For adults over 60, that threshold is closer to 2.5 to 3 grams, which typically means around 25 to 30 grams of high-quality protein in one sitting. Eat less than that in a single meal, and much of the anabolic signal simply doesn't fire, no matter how healthy the meal otherwise is. That's the entire concept of anabolic resistance in one sentence. And it's not a typo or an exaggeration, it's a threshold, like a light switch, not a dimmer. Here's the part almost nobody explains, and it's the single most useful practical takeaway in this entire video. In one of Padden-Jones's studies, researchers took the exact same 90 grams of total daily protein and simply redistributed it. One group ate the typical American pattern: a small 10-gram breakfast, a modest 20-gram lunch, and a large 60-gram dinner. The other group ate 30 grams at each of 3 meals, same total protein for the day. The evenly distributed group showed meaningfully higher net daily muscle protein synthesis than the skewed group. In other words, the mistake most seniors make isn't eating too little protein overall, it's eating almost none of it at breakfast and dumping it all at dinner, which means 2 out of 3 meals a day never even cross the threshold that triggers repair. Picture a campfire that needs a fresh log added roughly every 8 hours to keep burning. If you throw 3 logs on all at once at dinner and nothing the rest of the day, the fire burns hot for a while and then goes cold and stays cold until the next big dump of fuel. Feed it 1 properly sized log at breakfast, 1 at lunch, 1 at dinner, and it never goes out. Your muscle protein synthesis machinery works almost exactly the same way it needs to be re-triggered several times a day, not loaded once. This connects directly to the eggs we just discussed and to fatty fish from earlier. Eggs at breakfast and salmon at dinner both help you cross that 25 to 30 gram threshold, but Greek yogurt and cottage cheese are what make hitting the threshold at lunch historically the weakest meal of the day for most seniors' protein intake genuinely easy without cooking anything. I think of a composite patient I'll call Robert, 82, from a small Texas town, a retired mail carrier who still measured his good days by how far he could walk his own dog without stopping. When his walk started shrinking, block by block, his previous doctor told him it was just his age catching up. His protein intake looked reasonable on paper, he simply had it almost entirely backwards, with a light breakfast and a heavy dinner. We didn't add more total protein, we moved it. A 25-gram serving of Greek yogurt at breakfast, a cottage cheese and vegetable bowl at lunch, and a smaller, more reasonable portion at dinner. 8 weeks later, he told me he'd walked his dog's entire usual loop for the first time in over a year, without needing to sit on the bench halfway through. Here's how to actually do this tonight and tomorrow morning: plain Greek yogurt. Not the sweetened kind, has a thick, almost spoon-standing texture and a tangy, slightly sour taste that mellows beautifully with a handful of berries or a drizzle of honey stirred through it. A single cup delivers roughly 20 to 25 grams of protein on its own. Cottage cheese has a completely different texture, small soft curds in a light, faintly sweet liquid, and works as well in a savory bowl with tomatoes and olive oil as it does with fruit. Half a cup gets you close to 12 to 14 grams, so a full cup alongside a piece of fruit comfortably crosses the threshold. The goal for breakfast specifically, since it's the meal most likely to fall short, is roughly 25 to 30 grams of protein, which typically means Greek yogurt or cottage cheese plus 1 more source like an egg, rather than either alone. The synergy tip that ties this entire list together, pairing high leucine protein with the nitrate-rich vegetables from earlier and the omega-3s from fatty fish, means you are simultaneously triggering the repair signal. widening the blood vessels that deliver the raw materials, and improving how sensitively the muscle receives them, three separate mechanisms working on the same repair event at the same time, which is a fundamentally different outcome than eating any one of these foods in isolation. What we covered today isn't about looking stronger or feeling more energetic, though both of those matter. It's about the moment down the road when your legs no longer reliably get you out of a chair on your own. When a fall takes away independence you assumed you'd always have. And the research I've shared with you today is one of the clearest, most evidence-based paths I know for making sure that moment gets pushed back as far as possible. Your muscles are still capable of responding. They just need the right signal, delivered consistently, and delivered at the right time of day. Here is what to actually do, starting tonight. First, look at tomorrow's breakfast plan right now and make sure it includes at least 25 grams of protein, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, or 2 eggs instead of the toast and coffee pattern most people default to. Second, buy beets or a bag of pre-washed spinach on your next grocery trip specifically, not someday. Third, if you don't already have fatty fish in your freezer, add a bag of frozen salmon fillets or a few cans of sardines. To this week's list, frozen fish stored properly keeps its omega-3 content well for several months, so buying in bulk is genuinely fine here and saves both money and trips to the store. Fourth, spread whatever protein you're already eating across 3 meals instead of concentrating it at dinner, even if the total amount doesn't change at all this week. One important safety note: if you take warfarin or any other blood-thinning medication, speak with your doctor before significantly increasing leafy green vegetables like spinach and arugula, since their vitamin K content can interfere with how your blood thinner is dosed and monitored. Now, a lot of you are going to try to fix all of this with exercise alone and wonder why your legs still feel unsteady even after weeks of walking more. There's a specific reason walking by itself often isn't enough to rebuild the type of muscle fiber most responsible for catching you during a stumble, and there's one particular kind of movement that targets it directly. I made a video explaining exactly which exercise does this and how to do it safely at home. I'll link it right here. Have you noticed a real difference in your legs since changing how or when you eat protein? Tell me in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what someone else watching this right now needs to hear.